It's catnip, man. They
It
love it.
is. It's good stuff. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it from the constituency. And of course, you are Ryan Burge, professor of political science at,
Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, Illinois.
and you have been with us before. And we talked briefly in the other podcasts, I guess it's a few months ago now, about the notion that politics affects religion. And so I wanted to dive a little deeper on that with you, because one of the things that you and I were sort of talking about offline was this notion of a life cycle effect. And Michelle Margolis at University of Pennsylvania has a book that's gotten a lot of attention that basically says, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a certain period in your life where maybe you've fallen away from religion after your adolescence and college years, and then you start to become sort of a responsible, honest citizen or something like that, and you, you begin to be productive, and you have a job and a family, and with the kids especially, and then all of a sudden you're ripe for religion.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also had sort of partisan programming all this time, or you had a lot of partisan experiences in your upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
and that Michigan model sort of just is dominant in terms of your decision making when you go back looking for a church. Is that about right?
Yeah, so I mean, it's called the life cycle effect. It's pretty well studied in social science. Basically, it argues that when you're a kid, you're pretty religious because your parents make you be religious. 18 to 35 or so, you're less religious because you're figuring it out. You're kind of living a little wild life, maybe, trying to sow your wild oats and do all those things. You're a little bit more unsettled in your life. But as soon as you get married and have kids, you settle down. You want your kids to have a moral foundation. So you do what most people do, which is send them to church or synagogue or some religious group. And you start going too. They grow up through church. They eventually get up and graduate at 18. They go somewhere else. And then you sort of are stuck with a choice. What I think is fascinating is that some people in their 50s decide, okay, my kids are gone. I can stop going now. I don't have to fulfill that obligation. But there are other people in their 50s who go, you know what, I really like this church, and I want to stick around and make it a place where it kind of combats their loneliness, gives them a sense of purpose, and kind of carries them through for the rest of their lives. I mean, a lot of people don't think about this, but a lot of reasons that older people go to church, the religious part is important, but also a lot of them live pretty lonely lives. Their spouses have died sometimes many years ago, and they just need an outlet for socialization, and the church is a very easy outlet for socialization. Now, politically, though, that puts people in a tough spot. Let's say you're someone who went to college, maybe you got a graduate degree, you live in the suburbs like almost everyone seems like they do now, or live in an urban area. You have kids, and you want your kids to go to church like you went to church in the small town that you grew up in. So you start poking around, looking online, looking at Facebook, Googling around, asking people, what kind of church do you go to? More often than not, what you're going to hear is probably Baptist, Southern Baptist more than likely, or maybe a non-denominational evangelical megachurch. You take your kids to those, they got great programming, they got smoke machines and fog machines and great music and lots of people and all that stuff.
Well, they have music. I don't know if it's great, but
Well, depending on what your perspective on music is.
I had to throw that
it's
one
not
in.
it's not my choice. We sing hymns, man. They don't sing hymns.
I'm with you.
They sing Hillsong and all that
Oh,
stuff.
God.
So, but the thing is, lurking under the surface of all that gloss and all that fog and all that polish, most non-denominational megachurches, which are growing rapidly, by the way, they're growing 400% since 1972. They're the fastest growing religious group in America. Underneath the surface of that, those churches, most of them by and large, are very theologically conservative. They don't have women pastors. They don't allow LGBT people to be part of the church body. And by and large, they're probably at least 70 to 80% Republicans who voted for Trump in 2016. So if you come at it as a moderate or even a liberal, and you want to find a church home for yourself in 2018, your choices are basically a mainline church that has probably been on the decline for the last 30 years and is full of people who are 75 years and older, or an evangelical megachurch is full of young people and it's exciting and interesting, but the things you hear from the pulpit and the things you hear in Bible study are going to make you cringe and are things that you don't want your kids to hear either.
So does Margolis get into that?
Not much. Hers is more talking about how your partisanship kind of settles in over time, right? So she talks about like how your partisanship kind of becomes unsettled in your 18 to 35-year-old range. And she argues that your politics then pick your church, right? So if I'm conservative and I find a megachurch, then I go to a megachurch because I like it. My church is an American Baptist church. It's a mainline church, which in RelTrad means we're moderate Protestants, okay? And denominationally, that's true. Like we have female pastors. Some churches in our denomination affirm the LGBT lifestyle. At the denominational level, we're pretty moderate. I mean, in terms of like resolutions that are passed and things like that. But there are churches in our region. We had an area minister who was an African American female, and there were churches who would not allow her to give them any advice because she was both African American and female. So just because the denomination affirms, female pastors doesn't mean the local church does the same thing. There's lots of resistance, even amongst United Methodists, against female pastors. That's been
and LGBT too. I mean, that's been in the news a lot.
Oh yeah,
for the UMC.
Exactly right. So it's an oversimplification, but we don't have anything else. What else are we going to do? Just say, well, they're all different. We can't study it.
You'd have to get, I guess, granular data about individual or congregations. I would imagine. I don't know. That's a big lift, though, and that's a big lift.
Oh.
But the thing is it would seem to me on that. The other thing is not just you picking a church; it's also outreach. Because wouldn't it be the case that for evangelical churches especially, there's this emphasis on evangelism? And so you may have been the product of some push to reach out among friends and neighbors and family. Hey, come to my church. It's fun. We'll have a thing on Friday night. You'll like it. The kids will like it. Has there been any work on that? Has there been any kind of assessment of... I know from a professional standpoint, there's a lot of books out there that are for pastors and for church leaders. But I mean, any academic work about... I came to this church because so-and-so invited me, and then I found that I liked the politics too, and it just felt like a community, and then I went with it.
I don't think there's anything that, so the one angle would be like the pastor books, right? Like how to attract people to your church. They wouldn't talk about politics at all because they don't want to talk about politics at all. I think the $64,000 question in modern American and Protestant Christianity is, what have these evangelical megachurches done to the religious landscape? Because there's a lot of they want to portray themselves as, listen, we're being attractional. That's the word they'll use. We're being attractional. We're bringing in the lost, right? The non-believers into our congregation, and that's how we're growing, right? We're not cannibalizing other congregations. We're bringing new people into the marketplace. And in reality, we don't think that's true. It's hard to get data because the non-denominational churches don't want to share that data with you, but they don't do things like entrance surveys because I think at some level they don't want to know. The thing we always talk about is the amount of water in the bathtub going up, or is it just swirling around? Yeah. And I think more often than not what's happening is the bathtub just swirling around and people are leaving. For instance, the church I'm at right now, when we built our new building in 1964, we had 300 people. Now we have 20. And we have a church in town, which is a non-denominational megachurch that has 4 services and has over 1,200 people. The size of our community has not changed in 30 years. So the amount of water in the bathtub has not gone up. It's just swirled around to certain spots. I think that's what we've seen in American religion oftentimes is I don't think these churches are bringing that many new people into their attendance. I think they're just sort of cannibalizing other smaller declining churches and basically accelerating their decline.
How would you square that with Margolis's theory then? Is it somebody then, they are in this life cycle, they have their kids, they're of that age, and their politics are pushing them toward a non-denominational church, but they also have had experiences potentially with other churches. They're not just completely unchurched in their history, yeah?
Well, you also, against that backdrop, we have to consider the fact that evangelicalism was not what it was 40 years ago than what it was in the 1990s, right? Evangelicals in the 1970s, and most people don't understand this because, it's hard to think longitudinally about things like this. Evangelicals in the 1970s were a pretty moderate bunch. I mean, on Roe versus Wade, the Southern Baptist Convention, after Roe came down from the Supreme Court, basically had a resolution that said that, we don't love this, but really it should be a decision between a woman and her doctor, right? So they were even moderate up into the early and mid-1980s, I would argue. It was only until the 1990s when this sort of rightward lurch happened significantly. And I think that's when a lot of people who left my church came of age, was in the early 1990s. So when they're trying to figure out where they are politically and religiously, they're starting to see, well, I'm a Republican. I live in a small town. I'm white. Therefore, I'm going to vote for Republicans. My church is sort of moderate, but man, this pro-life movement and this anti-LGBT movement is growing rapidly, and I want to be a part of that because I believe in those things. My church is not talking about that so much, but that non-denominational church down the road seems to be talking about it, or that Southern Baptist church in town is starting to talk about it. So I think sort of politics sort of nudge them in a certain kind of place, where they thought, you know what, these moderate churches are not speaking to my political needs or my political views, or they're also declining, so they don't have the nice children's ministry and the youth ministry and the church bus and the summer camp trips.
Yeah,
so
well, it's also like a rest home, like you're saying. It's basically...
Yeah, it basically has become a rest home. And why would I want to go to a church with 75-year-old people? Like
because the music's better.
Oh, the hymns are way better. That's right. But there's only 12 people singing them, so they don't sound as good.
Ryan Burge, you are the man. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it on From the Constituency.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate it.